What just happened? What you've just seen was a little snippet of a project called Purgaliminal by an artist that goes by your local Breadman. It is, in the simplest terms possible, a very weird and non-linear story told through the mechanics of a non-existing RPG video game. Or at least that's how it started. If you know about Plastiboo's Vermis, a series of books that read like game guides with lore, characters, stats, and artwork for a game that has never actually existed, it's something akin to that. But it shows us the actual gameplay, its mechanics, encounters, progression, etc. An actual video game has, so far, never been made. But today you'll see that it really doesn't need to be an actual game, because it's already perfect just the way it is. Before we start analyzing the series and making sense of its lore, a few considerations, by yours truly. Art is about emotion. The worst thing that can happen when you're exposed to a work of art is that you feel nothing at all. No wonder, no joy, no sadness, no anger. What I've also realized in time is that a lot of great art has to be engaged with at its own pace. You need to let the artist guide you to get the full experience of it. And your local Breadman's art definitely makes the viewer feel many emotions. Positive, negative, conflicting. What you might assume at first to be a simple, cute little Weirdcore project turns out to be much deeper and more vast than you could expect. It's hard to put into words exactly why his work is so beautiful to me. On its face it seems pretty abstract and even random. And sure, if you just saw one of his short animations in your feed, you'd think, damn, what a vibe, and assume that there's nothing else to it. But as you dive deeper, you come to realize that there are some constants here. There is a story being told and a fascinating lore being built. Your local Breadman is a multifaceted artist. He does animation, illustration, music, voice acting, photography, and even has a clothing line. By the way, I've copped these bad boys, so go get yours. He has found a pretty big audience on TikTok and Instagram, but it seems that his YouTube channel is kinda lagging behind, although it's here that you find all of his greatest content. He's got different projects under his belt, some more lighthearted and comical, others more serious and heavier on the horror. And from what I can gather, most of them seem to take place in a universe referred to as the Void. A reality that in some ways reflects our own, but through a hypnagogic filter, like a mind being slowly shrouded by sleep and at the same time overstimulated by its own ADHD. It's always foggy, liminal, abandoned, with completely different areas connecting in strange and illogical ways. Here, all kind of distorted beings can be encountered, appearing seemingly from out of nowhere, sometimes hostile, sometimes friendly, other times just curious. Among his inspirations, Breadman has cited internet artists such as Trevor Henderson, David Firth, especially his Sock series, and children's cartoons like The Trapdoor, Stop It and Tidy Up, and the Bionicle movies. Then also Evangelion, the Subspace Emissary Adventure mode from Smash Bros, the SCP Foundation and especially Lord Bunk's Confinement series, which ripped that, and even Gemini Home Entertainment. That's quite the list. You'll notice that it's all very unconventional art. And Breadman's work is anything but conventional, both in style and structure. This, in turn, can make it quite hard to give an idea of what his stories are about without sounding insane, but I'll try. I'll especially focus on his longest-running series, Purgaliminal, but I'll also touch on some of his other projects. Let's just get a glimpse into this world, to have a better grasp on what we're talking about. I'll start by looking more closely at the first few episodes to ground us, but then I'll take things in a looser direction once we get used to this narrative style. The opening episode of Purgaliminal is titled Klaus.mp3, and it establishes immediately some recurring elements of the series. It begins with our character looking at the map of the area. We see his HP meter, which is at 995, and PP meter, which is at 78. I'm guessing it's like the Pokemon PowerPoints, but I'll call them PP because I'm 12 and I find it funny. When he closes the map, we notice that he's standing in a grimy alleyway and a message appears. Entity closing in. This is where we make the acquaintance of Klaus, a man with a comically thick Australian accent dressed in what looks like old military attire, with an unwavering malicious grin plastered on his face.
Greetings, my name is Klaus. I knew I'd find you here.
He tells our protagonist that he's been watching him for a while and that this void isn't big enough for the both of us. One day he will have to slow down and face him, but instead of attacking us, he warns us that there's a horde of entities ahead and that we might want to be careful. Then just takes off. This opening episode is so simple, yet establishes so much for what's to come. First of all, Klaus himself will be a very important recurring character, and he's set up as a sort of rival for our protagonist, but it seems like he wants to wait some more before challenging him. Interesting. We also learned that there are hostile entities in this place, although we don't see them just yet. But what's most important to me personally is the establishment of ambiguity. You see, one thing I love dearly about Purgaliminal is that it's never immediately clear who's hostile and who's friendly. Sometimes enemies will have friendly messages or tips for us, other times seemingly friendly entities transform into monsters and engage us in battle. Nothing is ever quite clear in the world of Purgaliminal, keep that in mind. The second episode shows us some battle gameplay. It's called Purgaliminal, concept gameplay for a surreal otherworldly RPG, which is a very explicative title. We're inside of what may be the second story of a pretty liminal looking house. We see our stats again, and they're a bit different this time. The player name is blank, the HP is 89 out of 120, the PP is at a full 60, nice. We also get a status indicator, which says uneasy. We also get to see some of the game mechanics in action. At this time we can scan, leave the area, or shift dimensions. The player picks the first option and the scan reveals one entity present, but not visible in this dimension, so it's time to shift. We move down one dimension and everything gets mirrored and takes a red hue, while one of the series' many bangers starts playing in the background. Oh, and we can also finally see the grotesque being in our path. The player chooses to talk to it and it says,
"Oh, to be reborn of pure flesh, what an honor it will be."
And the text, hostile, appears. So, the fight ensues. Our character goes into the items menu and we see that he has some cards and chess pieces. Selecting the 7 of diamonds, which gives him a 70% increase in the chance of a critical hit, he deploys a psychic attack called Hyperwave. It obliterates the creature. Before the thing disappears, it tells us,
"You will see my flesh again, but not in this form, my friend."
Now, back to our original dimension, the scene changes. We're in some sort of backrooms type area and the player's stats have been switched once more. The HP is at 99, the PP is at 70 out of 80, and the status is wrong. Interesting. After another scan, one entity appears. A twisted body with a dark hole where its face should be. It talks to us.
"If you're able to manipulate your dreams, be careful. You aren't the only one inhabiting the dream space at any given time. When you walk the halls of your dream state, just know there will be 2 sets of footprints. But I'm sure you'll find that out soon enough, my friend."
The player then chooses the option Ask for Gift and receives a CD with unintelligible writing on it. The creature adds,
"This CD contains some of the Breadman's music. It will instill comfort wherever you may choose to go."
And so the player shifts dimensions once more. Again, everything gets flipped. The room is tinted in a violet hue, and the creature, now a shadow covered with eyes and teeth, adds,
"Isn't it interesting how the human mind and its perception of reality is so fragile? All it takes is for one minor part of your brain to have a hiccup, and, well, that's when the illusion fades. Then the 3D space around you becomes a personalized hellhole of your brain's own design. After the time you've spent in the void, you won't need a mental disorder to see the true horror that lurks in the angles of what you can't see."
And the scene changes once more. So there's a bunch of stuff to unpack here. First of all, we were introduced to an important concept of the series, the dimensional shifting, which allows the player to see creatures present on different planes of existence. Second, we got a reference to Breadman's own music and universe, which is very cool. Go listen to those bangers. And I want to mention again how much I like these creatures, hostile or not, calling the character friend, and generally being weirdly chill like that. Obviously, the most important thing here is the second creature's words. From them we can gather that perception of reality is probably going to be an important theme throughout the series, a fact also made obvious by the dimensional shifting. But all the talk about dreams is also interesting. Dreams fall into that bizarre no man's land of our mind, where our perceptions and ideas work in unexpected and strange ways, where things can go from logical to completely nonsensical, where nothing is as it seems. Breadman himself has expressed a fascination with dreams, saying that dreaming is one of his favorite things, and the astral world obviously inspires his work. From what the creature tells us, there's also a chance of the world around us turning into a hellhole, but that after all the time the player spent in the void, he'll be able to see horrors that were imperceptible before. This naturally reminds me of Lovecraft and especially of the way in which his concept of madness is applied in Bloodborne, where the more incomprehensible and distorted things you see navigating the nightmare realm, the more insight you gain, and with it, your perception gradually opens up to things that were completely invisible before. We also can't skip over the mention of our protagonist leaving 2 sets of footprints, which implies that they're not alone in this void. But we don't know what's walking along them yet. The next section is set inside another house which looks like it came straight out of Jandek's first album cover. Let's take a look at the stats. HP is a full 600, PP is 368, and the status is Strungled. Isn't it curious how our stats keep changing? This could be just a random little detail, but there might also be a purpose in these variations. I've seen somebody suggesting that the stats could help us determine a timeline of events. Let's keep an eye on them. A message reads, "There is a strong aura in this room. We aren't alone." And so our player scans the place, finding a single entity. This thing tells us,
"The road ends here, traveler,"
and becomes hostile. The player selects the pawn item, which gives him an extra 30% damage on psychic attacks. He then uses a hyper strike, which decimates the creature. Before disappearing, it says,
"It would appear I have been defeated. No matter, the great plan will continue."
We move to another hallway. The stats have changed once more. The player checks the map and notices that there's a signal coming from the fog. He then observes the biblically accurate angel chilling in the playground, saying that it's been following him for a while and that he needs to skedaddle. So he equips a stealth emitter, which makes it less likely for entities to notice him for a period of time. Leaving the area, he comes across some lovely local fauna. The path to the left is blocked. The one to the right is clear. On the ground, he finds a piece of paper with the writing, "Only dead fish know of the sailor's sins," and some Hebrew underneath, which, if my translation is right, it says, "I'm drowning." The next area looks like something out of Inception, with a field folding over the sky and a street with houses underneath. Another being appears, telling the player,
"Reality is never black and white, you know? Everything and everyone in life is a gray area, not defined by one shade."
The scene flips upside down and something else appears, adding,
"Everything in this world is as complex as it is intertwined. Nothing is as it seems. There's always another side to things your perspective can't show you. Without the darkness, the universe would be blinded by light. But without the light, the universe would be consumed by darkness."
And another word appears, but this time I'm not sure of the alphabet it's using. The episode ends with the two creatures fighting the player, absolutely wrecking him. That's when we get our first game over screen. Klaus's face appears.
"You've gone and done it now, haven't you? Let's try this again."
With the choices continue or quit to menu. So again, we have a big focus on perception and points of view. All the talk about gray areas and reality not being black and white could be seen from an ethical standpoint, which might seem a banal interpretation, but you'll understand going forward that it could actually fit the story. That particular moment where our character finds the piece of paper also fits with this idea, because it might just be referring to him, who, by the way, is addressed as Traveler by the first creature. And this is not just a generic moniker, we'll see that this is how most characters will refer to him. What's interesting here is also the creature referring to a great plan. What is it talking about? Is it just a random enemy dialogue? Well, no. Something is, in fact, moving behind the scenes. We just don't know what yet. So, to recap and ground ourselves, so far we have a protagonist, the Traveler, what appears to be an antagonist in the character of Klaus, maybe, a setting, the Void, and the implication of a wider story tied to a great plan, in which both the Traveler and the creatures he encounters play some kind of role. Let's dig a bit further. The third episode is titled The Outlands, and it's a short one. The Traveler finds himself in the middle of nowhere, close to a highway. He does the usual, inspecting the scene and shifting dimensions. He then approaches a structure from which crying can be heard. Upon inspection, a creature that looks exactly like one of the two that defeated him in the last episode comes out and asks him if he's seen its offspring, which have vanished apparently, and to come back if he sees them. The Traveler goes back and shifts dimensions in the previous area. A horrifying beast stands in front of him, the dead offspring of the entity from before clasped between its sharp teeth. It speaks.
"I took its life. I snuffed it out. I felt its fear. I saw it tremble. I heard it cry. I gave it the gift of death. He was going to decay anyway. I saved him from that, you know? Death is the only certainty for us."
Well, that took a turn for the tragic and the macabre. There's something about this creature looking for its lost offspring that has been brutally killed by a monster not even that far away that's pretty heartbreaking. One important thing to point out here is the mention of decay. The monster tells us that the offspring would have decayed anyway and that it saved it. But our protagonist's status throughout the whole thing is also decay. Keep this in mind because the theme of decay is fundamental in Breadman's work. The fourth entry is called Chegel's Intervention. The player is once more in some sort of liminal hallway and his status is plonkered. He feels a presence nearby and after a scan, this thing shows up, a Ringaroi. The Traveler goes through the door on the right and it looks like a room in a rundown abandoned building. This is where the presence is emitting the signal from. Doing another scan, the protagonist is sucked into another dimension, and an imposing creature appears before him. It's called Hogaroth, and it tells the traveler that Klaus has ordered it to exterminate him. It adds,
Klaus told me everything, and now that I'm in the know, I can't stand by and do nothing. I'm so sorry. This is how it has to be. It's nothing personal.
Then this happens. This might be the biggest turning point for the series so far. First of all, from the creature dialogue, we get the sense that it's not really evil per se. It doesn't want to kill the traveler, but whatever Klaus explained to it made it decide that this has to be done, and that it can't just stand by. This makes it seem either that Klaus is an evil liar trying to get others to destroy the protagonist, or that the traveler has some kind of fault, that he did something bad. Maybe our traveler is hiding something we're not yet aware of. Of course, we also have the big reveal of Chegel, telling us that we'll also become Chegel. To get some extra information, we need to look at the 5th episode, The Red Zone. Here we get some narration from an unspecified character, and it sheds some light on who Chegel is. The narrator tells us that when he first felt reality becoming abnormal, he asked around for explanations, but everybody refused to tell him what was happening. Only Foghorn tells him the truth.
Reality has gone diagonal, and that creates an opening for visitors.
We then get more text, telling us about a messenger from a foreign realm who said he came from beyond the skies.
He spoke of omens to come. He warned us of a plague known as Chegel. That was the name no one dared utter out loud, for fear of giving it power. This world will not be spared.
Now, from this point on, I'd strongly advise you to keep going on your own, because I'll be getting into some pretty heavy spoilers, even though it's kind of hard to spoil such an abstract series. But I also think you should have the chance to interpret it in your own personal way, without me somehow muddying up your perception of it with my ideas. It's worth it, believe me. One of the tools we have at our disposal here is the amount of different perspectives we get on the world of the Void. Breadman has a couple of series set in the same universe, and often they give us extra information on the main project itself. It's hard to gather all of them and make exact sense of the events that took place in this world, of the creatures that inhabit it and their motivations, but it's also kind of unimportant in a way. To clear up what I mean by that, we have to talk about the broader themes of Breadman's world, because they're fundamentally tied to how his stuff is supposed to be experienced, in my opinion. Those of you who know about Weirdcore have probably immediately noticed a similarity to that style. Weirdcore is a type of aesthetic that you have surely seen floating around the web from time to time. It's best represented by low-quality edits of images that fall somewhere between liminal space photography and surrealist horror. And they're often characterized by the presence of seemingly random cryptic or unrelated text that questions the viewer's perception of reality. Weirdcore is also closely related to the so-called Traumacore, in which cute and childish images are put in contrast with dark phrases and items related to some form of childhood trauma. There's a really good book by Valentina Tanni called Exit Reality, which is an essay about the origin and meaning of internet aesthetics starting from Vaporwave. If you're interested in this sort of stuff, I highly advise you to read it. Anyway, one of the things she points out is how styles like Weirdcore and Traumacore are used as a sort of coping mechanism. That the aesthetic functions as something of a template for venting, allowing more people to access it and create something of their own within its bounds. At the same time, this remixing of similar and recognizable elements leads to the formation of a community, and so to a collective coping of sorts. This can obviously raise a few eyebrows, as you can imagine, with the idea of making an aesthetic out of trauma and people identifying maybe a bit too deeply with it, to the point of pathology, but that's not what we're here to talk about. What's important now for me is the fact that Breadman's work is adjacent to these aesthetics because it's also adjacent to their themes. In no uncertain terms, he has expressed that his art is also partly born of trauma and mental struggles, in particular ADHD. The more we progress and explore his work, the more frequently we'll find themes of fogginess or cloudiness of the mind, expressed both by the actual physical ever-present fog of the void, but also by the difficult-to-grasp logic of the events. We also find the themes of loneliness, of feeling inadequate, guilty and lost, of being constantly watched, judged, followed, of being hurt and hurting others, of being ostracized, losing faith, being angry at existence itself, etc. Part of what makes his work so special is the fact that all of this is not only expressed through words. These themes merge and become one with the structure, the aesthetic, the horror and the humor of his art. In short, at the risk of sounding a bit pretentious, the emotional level becomes one with the diegetic and aesthetic levels of his stories. And we all know how unpredictable, vague, and opaque emotions can be. If you think I'm going too deep and just glazing Breadman, yes, I am also doing that. But the guy gives us an actual example of how this works. When talking about how surreal and dreamlike the encounters in Purgaliminal are, he says that sometimes they're an actual way to cope with ADHD by letting it run free and basically transforming it into a creative tool, thus transforming a possible problem into something of a distinctive ability. And if that's not a good way to cope, I don't know what is. It's in this sense that breaking your mind over the actual, real meaning of Purgaliminal and his other work is kind of beside the point. The main thing you should do with it is experience it and let your own emotions run with it. Let them come into contact with the emotions of the artist himself. The experience will be surely at times painful and dark, but there are also many genuine moments of humor and respite in Breadman's videos, and if you engage with them at their own pace, these moments might mean a lot for you, like they do for me. Some of my favorite art is a mix of ugliness and beauty, and I found your local Breadman to be one of the best examples of this. Now, of course, this one stopped me from trying to piece a few things together at this point, but it was yet another way to encourage you to do so for yourself. If you're still here, let's try to understand what the hell is happening in Purgaliminal and who the bollocks is Chegel. The first appearance of this character, from what I can gather, actually comes before Purgaliminal, in a video titled Chegel 2020. This one is very similar to what we've already seen. Our protagonist starts to ponder Chegel and starts asking around about him, but nobody wants to reveal any information. As he's sitting and pondering, Chegel just shows up and says the line we've already heard. I am Chegel and one day you will be too. By the way, the timeline of the uploads can be confusing, with some videos being shorts but still watchable through the playlist with the longer ones, so from here on I'll be looking at the upload dates more closely, but I may make some mistakes. There's another external episode that came out after the first Purgaliminal upload, the one where we meet Klaus for the first time. This one is called Grey Void 2020. The interesting thing here is that someone with a strong interdimensional presence is entering the void, and the creatures we see are on high alert. The presence is these two spiky guys, and apparently they're here to leave a marker, which is this symbol. The whole episode has this pre-apocalyptic atmosphere. Something big is coming, and it's going to change everything, probably for the worse. At this point, looking back at the Red Zone episode, I think it's pretty safe to assume that Chegel is coming, and the spiky dudes are making preparations for his arrival. The same episode gives us some clues about who or what Chegel is. The narrator tells us of a messenger from a foreign realm who spoke of omens to come. He warned us of a plague known as Chegel, and adds, "This world will not be spared." It seems like Chegel, at least from the point of view of the creatures living in the void, is a great destructive force, a plague coming to corrupt their world in some way. And the phrase we heard him repeat, "I am Chegel and one day you will be too," makes him almost sound like some kind of cancer that will grow inside the characters of this world, that will in some way assimilate them, maybe. There's still the question of who the messenger is. Could it be Klaus? Is he part of the Great Plan? Is it possible that he's an opposing force to Chegel? But why does he target the Traveler specifically? Well, I think a big clue comes from Chegel's intervention, in which, judging by the title and by what happens in the video, it would seem that Chegel intervenes to protect the Traveler from the creature, to then speak directly to him. Could the Traveler have been specifically chosen by Chegel? How are they connected? Well, if we continue a little bit in the series, I think we can get a much clearer idea. We've got another short episode titled The Ethereal Grey. This one shows us some creatures that look like a patchwork of different materials and appear quite different from the monsters we've seen so far. We get some comments about fragments of consciousness being trapped inside of them. These are referred to as husks by the end, and doing some extra lore digging, we can find a video called Breadman Tour, the Shusklands, which basically gives us an explanation for what they are. The Breadman himself wants to show us what he has found in the Shusklands, an area of the void. He tells us that the Shusklands are full of these husks, each one unique, and he thinks that they used to be human. From these two videos, we can gather that some of these husks have been here for a very long time, and some of them even grew extensions, almost as if they're putting down roots. It also seems that the more time passes, the more whatever consciousness is still inside decays. Breadman comments that one of them seems to be hiding some information in its static field, almost as if whatever remnants are left are crying for help. So if you've wondered where the humans are in this world, here's your answer. Their fate has been that of turning into distorted husks, with their consciousness slowly degrading over tens if not hundreds of years. The worst part? They seem to be aware of this enough to cry for help. Great. But what did this to them, and why? And did it actually happen to all humans? Are the more normal creatures we meet not human? Well, we'll get to that. The next episode in the playlist order is Exploration. This one is a hefty 10-minute episode, and as the title suggests, we explore a whole bunch of places. I won't go over everything, but some moments here deserve to be analyzed. A peculiar one is this, where the player comments on the fact that everything feels off, like seeing a familiar face in unfamiliar lighting. Something is just off. I don't care what happens to me anymore. I am indifferent to all of this. Then an entity appears saying,
"You've fallen upon difficult days, my otherworldly friend. Home's no longer a place you can even recognize, huh? That must have a huge impact on your psyche. I do hope that better days befall you soon, man. I'll be here if you need me."
This is a perfect example of how emotions and trauma intertwine in the story. This is probably all tied to the creator's own psyche, but if we assume that our protagonist is the traveler once more, then this is also very important to understand his character, his motivations, and evolution. In the very next room, this guy shows up, telling the player,
Chegel will consume us all. You'll go down with us.
Before the segment gets cut off. This reinforces my theories about Chegel and his influence on the Void and on the Traveler. In the next segment, a blue ball called Kingpin tells the player to run because they're coming from everywhere. But this thing catches up, telling him that it will take the pain away, that he can let go, and they will return to the shadows together. At another point, the player encounters this corrupt creature, but after being defeated, it pleads for mercy, so he spares it. That's when the thing suddenly attacks him again, taking us to a game over screen with Klaus once more. The following segment is somehow even stranger, with the player saying that reality turned inside out and he's lucky to be alive. But an entity called Jeskrim appears and gives him a pretty weird message.
"We have all done things that we aren't proud of or are ashamed of. Sure, it matters what you did, but it matters more what you do with that. Do you refuse to take any sort of accountability or admit you did or said something bad? Or do you try to learn from your mistakes and prioritize growth? Your future will depend on how you choose to move forward."
So once more, the traveler's actions or morals are questioned. But is it just a simple warning, or has he actually done something bad? Generally, throughout the whole episode, there's hints at our protagonist being chased by entities through the void, barely managing to escape them as they come from the walls. The most interesting segment, though, for me, is probably this one. Walking aimlessly through the dark, an entity blocks the path. The traveler gets three options. I mean no harm, I won't attack unless I have to, and
I am going to slaughter you.
Surprisingly enough, he picks the third one. The small entity just answers,
So be it.
While the player chooses his weapon, we see that his status is dark. The traveler shoots the creature, draining all of its HP. Defeated, it just says,
Your weapons fashioned from physical materials won't be of any use soon. Watch your back.
That's when a large entity with 900 HP appears and asks,
Offspring, did this entity give you any trouble?
The other one replies,
No, he was just leaving.
This moment is utterly fascinating because we are actually shown the change taking effect in the traveler. This small entity was just chilling at a bench without hurting him, but he goes up to it like a bloodthirsty maniac and tries to kill it. We also get, once more, my favorite aspect of these interactions. The fact that the creature is not actually hostile to the player even though he attacks it. It actually gives him a warning and basically saves him from the large entity, which makes you feel even worse about the traveler's actions. Something is definitely morphing inside of him, and as the status suggests, it's something dark. In the same episode, we have another appearance from Klaus himself. After an existential chat with this cool guy, he pops up telling the traveler to leave this place, and that
This world isn't kind to mortals such as yourself.
Then a phrase appears in Hebrew once more, and I'm obviously getting the lettering wrong, because in one version the translator gave me "you are welcome", in the other they cut them, which is quite different. I mean, the first one could make sense, seeing as Klaus once again warns the traveler, but if anyone here knows Hebrew, please correct me. Also, the other time we saw Hebrew being used, it was on this piece of paper. So could it be that that was also a message from Klaus? Curious. From this point on, I won't be following the episodes in a linear way because there's too much stuff to cover. Instead, I will try to piece together in broad strokes some of the most important information we learn throughout the series. From here, you'll see more and more often dialogues that keep implying the traveler's constant transformation. Entities even begin recognizing him because his infamy starts preceding him at some point. The darkness inside him seems to be growing stronger and stronger. We'll also keep getting mentions of reality becoming or feeling diagonal, which I don't think is a fundamental thing for the lore's sake, but it's still interesting to mention. Breadman explains it as the feeling you get when you find yourself in real life in a space that feels liminal. You get the sense that something is off, and he describes it as reality going diagonal, which I love. Speaking of liminal spaces, which obviously play a big influence on this stuff, Breadman has expressed his fascination with transitory places in real life in a very similar way to what I said in my last video about subways in media. If you haven't seen it yet, check it out please. I'm very happy with how it turned out, which was just a very fun coincidence for me. Great minds and all that. Klaus keeps being a constant presence in the series, always sending his minions to stalk the Traveler and constantly gathering information about him. We also get more new creatures like the Rude Faces, which, in the episode by the same name, give the Traveler a chance to leave the area, but he refuses and once again threatens to slaughter them instead of complying. In Overdose, the player is told by a creature that these strange times he faces have left a mark on him, which gives off a frequency that calls attention to his location. We might assume that this is how the entities manage to keep following the Traveler wherever he goes. In Happenings, we get a look into how other characters are living through these times, like Mogloud, who says that they came from the sky and devoured the living on both sides, humans and Voidforms too, before his mind gets abstracted. In the same episode, the Traveler is visited by Gaz, a creature that tells him that even though he's observed many entities in his life, nothing scares him as much as the Traveler. Could he really be that bad? We also see the player getting a message from an angel, which tells him to meet with another creature that warns him of Klaus's cronies being after him. These are the Jester, the Beast, and the Spider, which might be Breadman's most horrifying design yet. An episode with an interesting title is I'm Starting to Remember How This Nightmare Began, which gives us more context on what's happening to the Void and its inhabitants. They say that everyone has been turned into husks or monsters, and that only some have been left behind, but they're slowly losing hope. The strongest moment for me is this one, where the Traveler, at least I'm assuming it's the Traveler, leaves this void form behind because he is a liability, letting him get devoured by the hostile creatures while he runs away, adding to the awfulness of his actions. At this point, it would be good to make a bit more sense into what the relationship between humans, void forms, and monsters is. One of Breadman's series is called the Educational Tapes, which is more closely related to something like Gemini Home Entertainment, and it gives us a lot of information about the strange creatures that inhabit the void. To be straightforward, it's his only project that I don't really vibe with. Don't get me wrong, it's good, but it's more typically horror, and I always miss the humor of his other stuff. But that's just me. It seems like it's actually one of his most viewed projects, so cheers to that, my man. Anyway, some of the educational tapes have important info that clears up a lot of stuff. This one is called The Descendants of Humanity, and in no uncertain terms, it reveals to us that void forms used to be human. The transformation is explained as the balance between order and disorder getting corrupted by human sin. Here, for a frame, Chegel appears. I'm not sure of what this implies. It could be either that he is the one responsible for this change, or that he corrupts humans too in a similar way. We're also shown the different levels of corruption. We've got fresh void forms, who look like the type of character we've already seen, like the Breadman himself. Fully transformed into a body of sin, the human form is lost. Upon waking up, their intelligence is animal-like, but slowly progresses into a childlike state with more awareness of environment. Then we got refined void forms, with the same silhouette but colored. After an amount of time ranging from 3 days to a year, complex intelligence forms. Intelligence leads to tools, agriculture, technology, and cooperation between void forms. Memories from their former human life may resurface, as well as former personality traits. Some may recognize that these memories and traits belong to them, others do not. Some may not regain any memories or personality traits, developing a new personality. And then corrupt void forms, which look similar but all crooked. Both fresh and refined void forms can become corrupted, leading to a decaying mental state. Thought patterns begin to spiral, becoming more chaotic and less grounded in reality. Violent behavior and psychic powers begin to manifest, including flesh-eating tendencies. The next evolution is a big reveal for the lore. What I've been calling monsters or creatures all this time are actually referred to as demons, and we find out that they're an evolution of corrupted void forms. Corrupted void forms will become demons. Behavior ranges from peaceful to violent. Level of sapience varies incredibly. Development of psychic abilities can range from useless to godlike levels of power. Choose your allies wisely. These demons are divided in 5 tiers, from harmless ones to godlike and incomprehensible ones. If you want to learn more of their lore, watch the educational tape. So, most of the creatures we've seen so far, even the more beastly ones, were all human at some point. The Purgaliminal episode that follows the last one mentioned is titled "Do You Remember Me?" and it's probably the most important so far to understand how the traveler behaves. In a room with an unadorned Christmas tree, a creature appears. It says,
"You slaughter us without hesitation, seemingly forgetting that we were once no different. Do you remember what my name was before the event? I didn't think you would. Human or beast, you still look at me with hatred. Seems nothing's changed."
The traveler strikes the entity and text appears reading,
"How ungrateful. Did it feel good, taking my life?"
To which he replies,
"It did. I do hate you. Even with your current form, you are no different to the monster I grew up with. Even as I took your life, you still had that evil look in your eyes. You knew that even in death, you would always have power over me. You always knew."
So that's pretty heavy. This entity was obviously somebody important in the traveler's human past, but has in some way badly mistreated or traumatized them. Or at least that's what he says. It seems that his own trauma is facilitating the growth of the darkness in his art. It's like he's gaining power and killing, abandoning, and taking revenge on others. If we want to get really even more lore heavy now, we need to check out Purgaliminal, Higher Planes, a series that seemingly started as another story inside the same universe, but quickly became directly tied to the original project and seems to me like its official continuation. We start from the point of view of a new character who goes through more or less the same game mechanics we've already seen with the Traveler. After an encounter with this giant level 3 threat and a level question mark threat, he seemingly gets transported into a different dimension, a surreal angular landscape covered in purplish textures. And here he sees a copy of himself disappear in a passageway. At the end we get a good look at this dimension. But that was just a small taste. The second episode picks up exactly where the last one left off. A voice reveals to our protagonist that they are in a dimension between realms. When he asks what this entity is, it says that it was
the final nail in the coffin for the humans. They came before all of this, before you, before the void.
When the protagonist wonders what happened to the humans, it explains that
they toyed with that which they weren't meant to see. They became so heavy with sin that they were given up on. Their final sinful act was building me. They were abandoned, left to fall into the disorder of the void.
So our guy asks,
"Who abandoned them?"
To which the voice replies,
"The ones from the walls left the humans behind, leaving them to be playthings of Chegel. Chegel transformed their bodies into icons of sin, as a reminder they belong to him. That is what you are now."
So, my god, some lore dump that was. We have a confirmation on one of my theories from the educational video on the Voidforms. Apparently the transformation of humans into Voidforms, and so demons too, is directly caused by Chegel himself, and that's why he appears for a frame in that video. But the questions raised here are even more vast. What did the humans toy with that led them to sin and to being abandoned? What is the voice that speaks to the player, the final nail in the coffin of humans, as he says? Also, I dreaded this moment, but we gotta talk about the ones from the walls. In short, I have no idea of what they are, and I don't know if I missed something or if it's meant to be left unknown. We hear them mentioned a few times throughout the series, and we even see one at the end of this upload, when we switch to the perspective of a fresh void form. But what they really are, I think, is never explicitly explained. At first I thought they were the visitors that you see throughout and that have their own educational tapes, checkered flying cylinders that use the walls to travel between dimensions and trap void forms into a two-dimensional prison, a fate worse than death called Glimmerance. It's a whole thing. Anyway, when we actually see one from the walls, it doesn't look anything like that, so I don't know how to categorize them. What is clear is that they're extremely powerful entities with a godlike status, and sometimes they return to observe the void because it amuses them that its inhabitants try to live meaningful lives. Let's keep going. This one starts off in a seemingly unrelated situation. The player is Borings. His stats are negative and his status is True Void. We get the usual gameplay with encounters and fights. He gets attacked by the clown course. This doesn't seem too important to me, but what does is the ending. A T-shaped entity called Astral appears in front of Borings and says,
You're one of them. Second piece of the operator. You must come with me."
Borings awakens in the dimension between realms. His status now is saying Inverted. Astral and the character from the previous two episodes appear.
"Are you sure this is the second?"
"Positive, I know it's them."
"Alright, let's get them up to speed."
And so the episode ends. The biggest question here is obviously who or what is the operator? Keep it in mind. The next two chapters are interludes, and they seem to follow the traveler's quest once more. This time we actually see the process of him getting literal quests in-game. The name interludes is a bit deceiving, because it might make you think that these episodes are filler, but they're actually very lore-heavy and indispensable. In one segment, the traveler comes across more rude faces who reveal that
Klaus has spread whispers that you will bring forth Chegel, ending the world. But you wouldn't do something like that, would you, traveler?
By the way, I'm now noticing that traveler is spelled with 2 L's, where before it was 1. Don't know if that matters in any way.
The suspicion of the rude faces rises, and we get the text, "The world is ending. Where will you hide?" We get more encounters, and one thing to note is that the traveler's status in this whole episode is
Dreaming.
he comes across this thing, which appears to know what you did, it knows what you are.
They know about Chegel.
Then we got Laszlo and Scarlyle, who comment on the fact that the traveler seems like a normal void form, but his frequency reveals that he's something else. The text, "They know," appears. In general, this episode seems to recount the traveler's journey and Chegel's growing influence on him, with other creatures ostracizing him and Klaus's cronies chasing him around because he
Will not allow to rob him of his power. This world belongs to him.
There's one particular moment that gives us an idea of the terrible acts our protagonist has been committing.
Killing off another Voidform town is too much work right now.
Damn. We then get some big meat cylinders lore dumping. The humans left behind the machine that led to their demise. A machine with the ability to become a god. They say only the operator can interface with the machine, but no one has been able to find them. It is said that the machine will grant a fraction of their powers to those it deems worthy. Those who are worthy are tasked with finding and defending the operator from harm. There is one who seeks to destroy the operator and the holy machine, but they have yet to emerge as well. Time will tell what the higher planes will dictate. And a quest activates. Find the operator. By the end, we see that the traveler is truly gone. He says that he's growing stronger and he'll soon be able to level this pathetic realm as Chegel promised. That's when Klaus finally appears in person again. His intelligence network informed him that Chegel's rot has taken hold of the traveler. Klaus kept his distance because he thought that the traveler was insignificant and that he would crumble under the weight of Chegel's power.
But it would appear that you have become a tangible threat to me and to everything I have built. I did not take this realm by force just to see it defiled by a lowly speck like you. I will deliver unto you, traveler, a just punishment.
But that's when Chegel comes forth from the protagonist, saying,
The traveler will not concede to you, human. I will protect you, traveler. Together we can watch this world become something of unfathomable beauty. But first you must gain strength.
Holy moly. Where to even begin? The traveler is fully under Chegel's dominion and is doing his bidding. He needs to grow stronger in order to destroy this world and build something beautiful. Finding the operator, his new side quest, is obviously important for this. We also find out that Klaus is human. Like, actually so, not a husk or a void form. Which raises so many questions that I won't even attempt to answer here. But his lines reveal something much more important to us about the big picture of things. We saw that the Void was supposedly Chegel's playground after the ones from the walls left. But Klaus reveals that he's taken this realm by force, and that it's his world. So, are we to believe that somehow Klaus overthrew Chegel and became the new ruler? And that now Chegel has come back with a vengeance? This all strongly implies that both of them are probably malignant forces, if we had any doubt that Klaus was actually trying to stop Chegel for benign reasons. So, we basically have two main forces fighting for control, Klaus and Chegel. But where do the characters from the previous episodes fit in all of this? Are they the ones that will rise and destroy the operator and the holy machine? The following episode is mostly, again, a dive into the traveler's psyche and Chegel's hold over him. I don't think it adds too much that we don't already know. Between this and the last episode so far of the higher planes, there's also a one-off called Borgen's Journey, and it's a whole 13-minute episode seen from the point of view of a new character, Borgen. We get our usual RPG action for most of the episode, but I want to focus on one specific moment here. At the start, some Voidforms ask Borgen to find one of their group that hasn't returned from an abandoned building. After different encounters and puzzles, he finally does, and... This is obviously the Traveler, but seen during his quest from a different perspective. I didn't expect it, but this hit me like a truck. For most of the time we are inside his head and see things from his point of view. Even when we understand that he's becoming more and more evil, we still feel some kind of sympathy. But seen from somebody else's eyes, we realize how monstrous he's become, consuming an innocent void form like a horrible parasite, hungering only for more power to please his master. Whatever humanity he had left seems well and truly gone at this point. And so we've pretty much got only Higher Planes episode 4, and this one finally explains a lot of things. That's why I won't cover it. If you've gotten to this point, you're obviously interested, but I want you to actually go to Breadman's channel and discover the answers for yourself now. I've given you the necessary tools. This last one is heavy on the emotions and on exposition.
This would usually bother me, but after all of these abstract episodes that have to be connected like a puzzle, it's actually nice to get some straightforward answers for once.
So that was Purgaliminal, one of the best art projects I've seen on the internet in the last few years by one of the most interesting artists active at the moment. At this point, I just want to point out two more broad themes in this series that should already be quite clear. Remember when I told you to keep in mind the theme of decay? Probably not. Anyway, it's not hard to see that it's one of the central themes of this project. It's the reason for the analog aesthetic and all those glitch effects we've seen. Breadman has expressed his fascination with technology that decays and in that process distorts the image with unpredictable and naturally beautiful effects. And it's again an example of how the themes intertwine directly with the style, because everything is, obviously, slowly decaying in the void, getting more and more distorted and unstable. Another theme that these last few episodes really drive home is the similarity to the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. It's the one where humans try to build a giant tower that soars over the clouds to reach God, who in turn destroys it and mixes the human language so that they wouldn't be able to understand each other and so work together to repeat their actions. It's a story about our own hubris and also gives a biblical reason for why we all speak different languages. Purgaliminal's lore obviously imitates this. The sinful humans tried to build a powerful godlike machine, but by doing so, they angered the ones from the walls, their masters, who in turn left them to decay in the void as Chegel's playthings. Chegel, who, dare I say it at this point, seems to be akin to this world's version of the devil. A lot of questions still remain unanswered. For me, the most interesting one is probably, how did Klaus, as a human, forcefully take control of the void? But we must wait and see for that. Again, I love this man. I love his work, I love his music, I love his t-shirts. Did I mention that you should go to Void Collective's store and cop some for yourself? The only thing I'll add at this point, which might surprise you after this whole tirade on Purgaliminal, is that it's not even my favorite thing he's done. I actually adore his more comical videos, where he uses his Breadman mascot, especially the 32-minute epic The Boilerman Visit. I don't even want to think about how much work it took to make. Go and support him in any way you can and just vibe with his stuff.
Cause he's just a proper lad, ain't it?
I hope I managed to make this somewhat comprehensible, and I hope I did Breadman's art at least a modicum of justice. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for this first year on YouTube. You've been real good sports. Goodbye, and see you, Space Bionicles.